Right, lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope everybody can hear me. So just a little bit about us as Trussell. We formed 20 years ago. We both worked in archaeology for quite a long time, doing various different things. I had a strange midlife joint crisis. We're not married, by the way, so our spouses had to put up with us having midlife crisis. And we formed Trussell. It's just the two of us, and we've done an extraordinary amount of projects since then. As Mel has said, a lot of them being upland work, upland surveys, particularly in the Elan Valley area around there. We've done an awful lot of work, but also across the whole of Wales. Snowdonia did kill us off, it has to be said. That was too big. But we've done work in there. But we also do lots of other work. We do lots of work for the planning system. We've done heritage interpretation, community events, community projects, and things like building recording, watching briefs, and other excavations, which we'll see a little bit of as we go on. And just to explain the little purple logo down at the bottom of the screen there, we're also a registered organisation with the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists and have been since 2009. And this is something that we treasure really and hold quite dear. The Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, of which we're both members, has a scheme whereby organisations are registered, and we have to every 3 years go through a process where we're observed, checked, have to document what we do, we have to show improvement, we have to show changing methodologies to meet new demands, etc., etc. And it's a sort of peer review, but there is a board who oversees. And this project has actually been part of that, because one part of that every 3 years is that we have a site visit and somebody comes to watch us on site, and somebody came to the excavation this year.
And we passed.
And we passed it. Well, fingers crossed we have. We've been told we have. So that's just a little bit about us. Next one. You're in charge. That's your job at the minute. There you go. Just a little bit slow. So this is really sort of picking up on what some of Mel was saying. The Abbey Come Here Heritage Trust have been involved in particularly looking at history of the Granges, and the farm at Cwmffwrn they've been particularly lucky with, as it lies within one of the Granges, and the landowners are very willing to allow them to help study the landscape here. So various different projects have been done with various different funding streams. There's been sort of drone photography surveys, field walking surveys, excavations of other sites in the valley. And this all led up to the point where we met them, became involved with the work they were doing. So we want to take you through these various points. We want to first of all look at the basic history of Cwmffwrn, its context. Why is it there, or what is it there? The excavation that we've done, the results that we've had back off that excavation so far, and then a bit of discussion at the end, and hopefully we can have some questions, answers, and discussion at that point.
We've got a new result, I was saying, for the end that we've only had in the last week or so, which you haven't heard about, which is quite exciting. We're going to keep that for the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was doing this. Right, so just whereabouts are we talking about, for those of you who don't know the area? If you can see the map at the top left, just showing the topography of mid Wales. You've got the Elan Valley and its reservoirs to the west. You've got the River Wye coming down all the way down there, and then Llandrindod Wales to the southeast, and Llangurig to the northwest. And we're sort of in somewhere in that blue rectangle. And this is sort of just showing you, the bottom image is showing you exactly where the location of the excavation was. So there's quite a bit forestry. This is in a valley. You can see the stream running down the centre of the valley to just under the L of location of excavation. You've got forestry on that side and whatever. And this map just shows you a little bit. It's a historic map of 1833. The first series 1 inch to 1 mile survey, and it just shows you some of the areas. If you show where Cwmffwrn is now, so Cwmffwrn is there in the middle of all this. We've got Abbey come here over on the right hand side, and then St Harmon over on the left. So that just puts it in a context. But one thing this map does show you is just how hilly this place is, with lots of different little valleys and little hillocks and lots of turns and twists in the landscape. None of it over dramatic, but it is quite, as you can see, it is quite valleys going this way and that way, etc. Little streams. Quite a hard landscape in a way to work through. If you go up a valley, it's fine, but if you're trying to cross, it's not. But definitely upland, yeah. So we're going to look at Cwmffwrn Farm now.
Make sure I can be heard now. I'll do this next little bit now. I hope you can hear me. My voice isn't the strongest at the minute. So I'm just going to go very quickly go over a little bit of the history of Cwmffwrn Farm, okay? To give you a bit more historical context. Now, the earliest map we've got that shows Cwmffwrn is this 1817 Ordnance Survey, original surveyor's drawing. And you can see in the middle of that, you've got Cwmffwrn named, spelt correctly at that stage. And you can see the little pink dot in the to the left of the name, which shows there are 2 pink dots. There are 2 buildings shown there at that time. And that's right, you can see it there now. You can see it quite clearly. This map hasn't got a great deal of detail, but it shows that Cwmffwrn was a place in 1817. The next map we've got is an Abbey come here. The estate was sold in 1837, and a sale map was drawn up. It's not the best map, but Cwmffwrn, now incorrectly spelled as Cwmffwrn, but nevertheless still the same place, is shown, and its lands are shaded in blue. To the sort of bottom in that blue area below the name Cwmffwrn, it's a mess. It does say 379, and it does show 2 buildings, but I don't know quite what happened with the cartographer, but he didn't get it drawn very well. Luckily, a few years later, 5 years later in 1842, the parish tithe survey was undertaken, which gives us a much clearer view of what was going on at Cwmffwrn. You can see the field system is there, but you can see again 2 buildings, and we'll talk more about these buildings shortly because they're very important to us. There's one main building, and that is in 387 is the parcel number, and that's actually described as the homestead, which we would take to be the farmhouse, I would imagine. Just to step back a little bit on the tithe map to look at it from further away, you can see that Cwmffwrn is actually to the bottom of that map, but its lands extend up to the top of the map where Sheepwalk is, and to the west, as it were, of Cwmffwrn, you've got Llanallteren has got its Sheepwalk. Interesting observation, just a brief observation, is that arrow marks that boundary line. At that time in 1842, that was the extent of enclosed land. So the sheepwalks were unenclosed mountain pasture at that time. It was a decade or 2 later that after the act of enclosure, that the higher land at Cwmffwrn and its neighbouring farms was actually enclosed and brought into the field system. So we can very much at that stage, the mid 19th century, look at Cwmffwrn as quite a marginal property, really, up in this sort of sheltered valley, but quite high up and on the edge of the farmed land, on the edge of the mountain pasture. Now, we skip merrily on to the 1880s, and the Ordnance Survey start making much more detailed maps. This is the first edition 6-inch map, as they say. I think it was 1888 was published, but it was surveyed a few years earlier. And we see a very strange thing has happened at Cwmffwrn. We've got this abandoned building, it seems, because when something is white like that on this edition of the OS, it means it's no longer in use. So something's come into being and gone out of use between the tithe map of 1842 and this 1880s Ordnance Survey map. The homestead that we saw on the tithe map would be in that blue circle, but it's not shown on this map, so it's gone for reasons that we can't yet understand. We'll come to it later. If we put the tithe map and the OS map side by side and orientate the OS map to match the tithe map, we'll see what's happened a little bit in a bit more detail. That building there, for purposes of this exercise, we'll call the upper building, is on both maps. The homestead on the tithe map is clearly not on that map. But now we've got a map has appeared, sorry, buildings appeared here that isn't on the tithe map. So something significant has happened here. Now, there's your upper building, as I call it. We're going to call that building the platform, and you'll see why eventually. That's what was known as the homestead on the tithe map. And the other building we'll call the cottage for reasons which I will explain shortly. We'll actually look at them one by one now, and I'll start with the cottage. That seems to be, start at that end, seems to be the easiest thing to do. The cottage had a brief spurt of fame but in 2022 when the members of the trust actually excavated it and they cleared out the ruins of a very nice stone-built cottage, it seems. I say nice, that may be an overstatement. There's not much left of it. But this building is a bit of an oddity because it's not on the 1842 tithe map, but it's abandoned by the time of the 1888 OS map. So it was very short-lived, it would seem. Undoubtedly, it was built by the estate, by the Abbey Cwmffwrn estate. I will not go into that side of the history because it's far too complicated, and there are far better people on this call who would probably pull me up on all sorts of points I'd get wrong. But what's evident to us as archaeologists, when you look at the excavation that was carried out there, you see all the elements we would expect to see of a 19th century rural cottage. The use of red bricks around the fireplace, the lime mortar scattered everywhere, mixed in with the earth. And it's a nice, it's a fairly well-built stone building. It's got all the, everything, the classic elements of a 19th century cottage: flagstone flooring, etc., lime plaster on the walls. I love this image. It shows the happy members of the group in the sunshine. Lovely view down the valley. Abbey Cwmffwrn village, of course, would be over the hills in the distance there. But it's a reminder to us again of this. As Jenny said, this landscape is very much one of valleys and little nooks and crannies, and Cwmffwrn is really tucked away in a very sheltered spot up this particular valley. But it's got some lovely views, to be fair. I'm going to skip on very quickly in terms of the history of the cottage to this 1953 map, surveyed or resurveyed in 1948. This point, look what's happened to Cwmffwrn. It doesn't exist. It's not even named on this map. The place has been abandoned. The shell of the cottage is shown. The homestead or platform is not shown, and the upper building is gone now and has been replaced by some trees. It seems a little coniferous plantation. So from the mid 19th century, when it's a farm with a homestead, but a century later in the mid 20th century, it doesn't exist. It's been forgotten. And here's a photograph of the cottage. In 2023, I think this would have been a year after the excavation, covered in sheets. Encouragingly, the new homestead at Cwmffwrn is on top, on the slope above, which is one of the few 21st century farms now in this area, I suspect. But it's an amazing thing to think that we've come into a new century and there's yet another house, another homestead has appeared on the holding. Right, let's go up the slope a bit to the upper building. Have a quick look at this. I haven't got a great deal to say about the upper building because it doesn't exist any longer. Again, back to the tithe map, we see it there. It's one of the few consistents on the 19th and early 20th century maps. When I look from the site of it, I haven't got a photograph of it because it doesn't exist, but the present owners have a shed on the platform, on the foundation of where this building was. And you can see that shed to the right-hand side of the photograph. I just want to draw attention again to the lovely view down the valley, the black plastic sheeting over the cottage you can see at the bottom of the hill, okay? And also the fence in the foreground there, that's what was the common boundary at the time of the tithe map, okay? So the land below that fence was enclosed before the mid-19th century. Everything above it was enclosed later in the 19th century. So where the new house and sheds are on the farm actually would have originally been mountain pasture land back in that mid-19th century. So I have nothing else to say about the upper building at all. The platform, now, this is where things get more archaeological, more interesting, perhaps. The platform is a bit of a mystery. Now, if we look at an aerial photograph of the holding maybe 10, 15 years ago, when the new farm was beginning to appear at Cwmffwrn and the first shed had been put up. I can pick out for you where these things are. There's the cottage. That's the site of the upper building, or which is now a shed. And the platform you can see is that scar, I must say, appears to be the site of the homestead shown on the tithe map. Okay. When we go onto the ground, that's what we see. This is why we call it the platform, because it is a platform. It's a levelled off platform, a building platform, as we call it in archaeological parlance. There's no evidence of a building. There's no ruin. There's no stone. There's nothing to be seen on the surface. Grass, it's quite damp. There's a lot of water, as you can see. It's quite boggy in places, and then reeds love growing there. Now, to us as archaeologists, that's a classic house platform. And we see a lot of them in the landscape. We'll come to that a bit later on, undoubtedly. But it immediately becomes an interesting site to us, because it's a platform like that we would normally associate with medieval or early post-medieval settlement, something from maybe the 11th, 12th century up to the 17th, 16th, 17th century. And we wondering, well, where's the homestead that was on the tithe map gone, for one thing? Where's the farmhouse? What's happened to it? This doesn't make a great deal of sense to us visually. Hence, after some discussion with members of the trust and a bit of toing and froing, we came up with this plan to actually carry out an excavation to actually try to answer that basic question. Well, what is this platform, and what's happened to the farmhouse that was there 150, 160 years ago? So at that point, I'm going to hand back to Jenny to talk about the excavation.
Right, so we in 2023, i.e. last year, we had a couple of days on site. They were very intense days in that we had 16 volunteers a day, I think, as well as members of the trust, and people on site were took part in a range of activities, and they swapped round, so they were quite intensive for people taking part and those of us leading the different sessions. But we didn't do a lot on site. What we did was we opened up 2 areas and took the turf off to have a look to see what was underneath. Now, what was underneath, was that the next slide? Okay, I think this is this slide. One thing I will have to commend the group for is they are marvelous at organising things. The people working in the background to get it all set up, we didn't do any of this apart from put the fence up. But everything else was in play and worked really well for everything, everyone, I believe. So this is in 2023. You can see in the muddy stuff in the foreground, we cleared some of the reeds off there, but you can see the standing water. And even though it's fairly dry that year, it was still a bit damp. And to the left of the photograph, we didn't really go. But we got people involved with clearing up stuff, and they got to see things starting to appear beneath them. We also had things going on like levelling, people being shown how to take levels with Phil in the background there. Julian Rivest was showing people drone photography, and Julian Lovell was taking people off for a walk to have a look at one of the former excavations. We didn't get too far down into anything. We really just took the topsoil off and just got started to get the hint of things that were starting to be revealed. This is just showing people on site doing things. The little JCB wasn't used. I'd like to just point that out, that was not used on site. It was all done by hand. So this is the second of the 2 areas that we opened that year, and you can see the spread of flat stones there that told us something was going on. And this is just a nice shot which starts to show you some of the form of this site. What's the next slide? Okay, all right. And you can start to see that it's not flat, that it steps down a lot. It steps down to the side and it steps down facing us here, and we'll come to that more in a minute. So having done that bit and it went well, the group were keen to have another bash and see what else we could do. And in July this year, we undertook what was actually a 4-day excavation, 2 days with just members of the trust, particularly trying to training them rather, training them in various skills that were needed on site, and 2 days when we again invited public volunteers in. This is sort of what it looked like before we actually set anything up. As you can see, we covered the 2 areas that have been previously opened up with tarpaulins, but around the rest of it, the vegetation grew fast and wild. And here you can see, I think is it Phil, Julian, and Angela getting to grips with trimming to try to take the vegetation down before we set anything up. So this was done a day or 2 beforehand. And lo and behold, by Saturday, I believe it is, so after 2 days, this is what the site looks like. And thanks to Julian Revest for this drone photograph. So you can see the vegetation's down, and you can see the 2 areas that we opened up in previous year, but also we opened up a very long trench straight down the centre of the site, and another small square piece as well. And this is just looking down that long trench on the top of it. Again, this gives you some idea if anybody who wasn't there. You can see it along this thing, and you can see it falling off on both sides. So what we're excavating on is this piece of ground that's protruding outwards and slopes down at the end and on the sides. That's just an aerial shot showing how busy everybody was. Various activities going on the site. We've got Phil doing levels at the time, Julian waiting to take a tour off there. Alison, who did lots of photography and interviews with people who are working on the site, is in the middle of the mix in the middle. And I'm talking to the person who did our registered organisation thing. So very busy. But we had people working in pairs and kept an eye, taught them what to do, what to look for, and we're continually sort of looking around the site. So now, this is another shot of what we will call the platform. All right. Now this shows actually that it's not just one platform. Quite often when you see these sites, and we'll have a few examples later, we're looking at one leveled area or flat area. This one has actually got 2. So the upper platform is this area up here. So this is the area we worked on in 2023 and has got the start of the long trench down the centre. And the lower platform is down the bottom here. And you can see very distinctly the step down onto this lower platform, which then steps down itself. So you've got these 2 different levels that this site is working on.
Just say that the reeds at the top left are part of the upper platform. That's an area we can't get into because it's so wet. But the platform extends right into the hills.
Yeah. Okay. And this is a profile along both platforms. Yeah, sorry, we can't see. Just showing you how the ground slopes. The dotted bit at the east, well, that end, the left-hand end, we've just got east on it. I've blown that. Never mind. Is the bit with the reeds, and that's the bit that we haven't really been able to get to grips with, or at least not so far. It's very wet, but this area is what we would call a fan on a platform. It's the bit that it's cut into the hill slope so that they can pull material forward to create the flat bit, which is called the platform. And so that's the flat bit. Note it isn't actually level, it gently slopes downhill, and that's to aid drainage on it so that it doesn't end up just becoming a boggy mess. And then at the bottom, once you've pulled all the ground forward, you end up then with this sticking up bit at the end, and that's called your apron. And the same thing sort of repeats on the smaller platform on the right-hand side, on the lower platform, although it hasn't really got its own apron because fan, well, it's got an apron, not a fan. I'll just get it mixed up now. And it also gives you some idea of the overall length of this thing. So including both platforms, it's at least 20-25 meters long overall. Right, so this is an aerial shot of it. Well, no, it's not. It's a photogrammatic shot taken from aerial photographs. and it's very plastic looking, but it's fine for our purposes. So this is the area excavated. So Trench A, this is one of the areas we did in 2023, and we did more work on in 2024. The boggy area at the top of that rectangle was cleared of reeds to try to let some of the water drain it away, because we were having problems with water this year a bit up there. And just go back a sec. Right, so if you're looking at this, the top of the rectangle as it is there in this slide becomes the left-hand side of the photograph, so you can see the clay there. There is a gully running through the middle of this that has been excavated. We re-excavated it, but it was actually, that's what I'm looking for. It did already exist. So we excavated that a bit to let water run off across the site, because otherwise it would start to become unworkable. And then you can see at the bottom this slight arc of stone. Now this bit was quite interesting. To start with, we hadn't made that much of it, but after clearing up this year and doing another trowel over, it started to become apparent that it was actually something we ought to really be taking good note of. This next one. Okay, I'll come back to that one in a second. We also had a small post hole here, which that's excavated, filled with water. Again, you can see this problem with water in this top area. And we think there's probably a post hole underneath there. You can see the darker material in the middle there. And we think that may be a post hole or a pit. The stone on top's got nothing to do with it. We think that stone has come from the line of stone going across the site here. We think it's been dragged and it's out of place. So it's not to do with whatever that pit or post hole might be, but that it belongs to this broken line of stone going across the site here. This may be interesting as well. We're wondering if that might be the base for something like a timber beam. It's not it's not a wall in its own right. It's not got a lot of stone in it. We've had a little bit of a look, and there doesn't seem to be much more to it than what you've got there. But bear in mind this when Paul talks about something later. But that could be enough to lay a timber on, just to keep its feet out of the water, and make sure that it was lying flat. So back up to the slightly circular feature. This was it prior to that photograph. And what we realized was that this was actually a line of flat stones, or stones that had been flat and tilted. And it was quite an exciting moment when we started to try to take some of those stones off the top. And we realized what this was actually a drain. Underneath that top stone, those where you can see the people there getting to grips with one of the flat stones on the top. Once you took the flat stone off the top, underneath was a V shape formed by two stones coming down to form a V. So it was a very simple little drain and quite small. You know, it's not going to take sort of a huge amount of water, but it must have been there to provide a continual drain taking water away. So you can see that in the again another view. That view on the left then is after we've taken those top stones off. Unfortunately, you don't get to see into it terribly clearly because it keeps filling up with water. So, anyway. Right, Trench B. This is again, it was one we started in 2023, and it's got several elements to it that are worth investigating. Here's a view of it looking from the south north across the platform. Again, in this you can see the shape of the platform. We're looking up a slope, then it goes flat, and then it goes across. As we look across it, not looking along it, we're looking across it. You can see the shape of this platform standing out. Now these flat stones here were a little bit we didn't quite understand them to start with. They're flat stones. They appeared like they might have been laid or part of a surface, but they were on top of this brown stuff, and it was why we got this depth of material here. It didn't really make any sense. And as we were recording, we couldn't make sense of this, so we had lifted one of the stones off. At that point, it became apparent to us what was happening. This is completely contrary to what you normally expect archaeology to do. Archaeology, you expect latest thing, bit earlier, bit earlier, bit earlier. So you've got stratigraphy, you've got layers like in a cake, but just going down, and each one is earlier than the other one till you get to the earliest at the bottom. That isn't happened here, because that brown layer underneath that stone is bracken roots. And what the bracken that was growing on here has done is it's got underneath the stones with the roots, rotted, but lifted the stones up as well. So that layer is actually the latest thing here, but it's beneath the stone. A little bit complex, but it did confuse things a little bit. But this more concentrated area of flat stones here, again, we took a stone off when we were recording it, and it became a bit more apparent what was going on. And we think again here that we may have a large post hole or even a pit, because all of these stones that we can see into it are tipping down into something. They're actually not flat. They're tipping centrally down into something that's beneath. So we think that might be a pit or a post hole. This we'll show another slide of in a minute, but this bit are some edge set stones, quite thin, no more than 2 or 3 centimeters thick, but set upright down into the ground. It's a little hard to see how that was done, but there is faint trace of a small slot that was put there for them to be put into, and they seem to be connected to the flat stones beyond them. But at the minute we're not quite sure what that's about. These may be of interest. One of the reasons for wanting to bring the trench down over the sides of the platform like this was, we're looking for a building here. And as you may have noticed already, there isn't much sign of a building going on here. Certainly no stone, no brick. But you've got these two things here. Are these the remains of either post pads? So you put the stone there and then put a post on top of it. So instead of having a post hole, you have a post pad and it just sits on top of that. Or possibly just stones on which a timber beam sat. Don't know the answer to that one at the minute, but it's possible because there's nothing else visible on this edge that suggests anything in terms of the structure. So this is the looking down onto the things that we were just looking at. The bits to the left bottom there, the stones tilting into possibly a pit or a post hole. The flat stones to the right are then bounded by these upright edge set stones that I was talking about before. Again, it's hard to see how they were put in and quite what they're doing, but they do seem to connect it with the flat stones to their right. The flat stones to the right have been a cause of quite a lot of discussion. I mean, lots of people, and because they do seem to have an arc. One edge seems to be a bit of a curve, and it almost looks more so when you're actually on site. So could it be a wall? Could it be a drain? Once we'd found the other drain, and we're not certain about that, but we do have a hint that where the arrow at the top is pointing, there does seem to be that there might be a trench between these stones and the stones just to the north there. And that we may have some form of a gully, slot, trench going on there. So that's trench B. Now trench C. So trench C we opened up in 2024. Before that it was all turf covered apart from where trench B was. And we've got several features in this, some we'll come back to in a minute. Here was quite a concentrated stone spread. We'll come back to that. Here we had possibly a slot, sill beam slot. Again, we'll come back to that one in a minute. The pit we'll look at now a little bit. This is at the junction, so it's at the bottom of the apron of the upper platform, and where the lower platform starts, if you like. And in this area, everything's a bit confused. And we're starting to think that these platforms may be a different date, the lower one being later, because they don't. The natural regression you might expect from one to the other doesn't really happen. But in this area here, where this pit is, it's been confused further by something later happening. Something's cut into the side of the platform, and I think you can sort of see it. There's almost a V either side of the word pit going out, that suggests maybe they've cut into this, and maybe it's not just a pit. Maybe it's they've done something else, whether it's to put a building there or who knows, really. But it was filled with a very dark material, suggesting lots of organic material in there afterwards. And then the significant spot on the end here, this is in the platform material of the lower platform. So it's basically just all clay, sandy, silty clay. There's a variation in colour, but just as you expect to find in the natural subsoil, which is really what it's made of. So what we wanted to know here was, right, well, there's nothing showing on the surface, so we've got no sign of a structure on here. What happens when we take it down into the body of the platform a bit? So we dug down further, and two of the weekend volunteers sort of called us over and said, "Oh, what's these black bits?" And we said, "Oh, right, great. This was charcoal. They'd found some charcoal very nicely at the bottom of the bit they've been working on. So it's nicely sealed in. It hadn't been disturbed by animals. It's quite a way down. Hadn't been disturbed by tree roots. And so we actually had some charcoal that we could date from there. So although in fact it doesn't look like it's very significant, that actually is a bit quite significant. We'll come back to that later. What happened to D&E? Okay, so we just gone back to trench C again. So this is at the left-hand edge, if you like. The material the arrows pointed to there seemed to be just thrown up by the gully. So that gully we showed that had been dug through diagonally across the site, seemed to be material from it. But next to that and underneath it was this quite a substantial stone spread. Not substantial in terms of the stones themselves. They're all very small, angular bits of stone. No rhyme, no reason why they were there. There was no pattern to how they were laid down, but it was quite substantial, this. It also did have quite a lot of blobs or patches of a whiter clay. And we'll come back to this in a minute. But this wasn't the same clay as the platform's made of. There's a lot whiter, a lot sort of more grayer clay than that. But also this area showed signs of burning. Not enough to sort of say, oh, right, that's definitely a hearth or that's definitely something. But there was a lot of charcoal in this area, and also sort of reds and browns, blacks. It would go the general burnt feel to it, or burning. And back now to the sill beam slot. So that's me on the end of the platform there on the apron, and then back this way is where this sill beams, we think this sill beam slot is. And Jackie got very excited about this bit. And and did a good job at doing this. I will just say the two holes you can see there aren't post holes, they're not stake holes, they're mole holes. Moles seem to quite like this thing. Next one. This is just another shot of this slot. Again, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you can see where the big stone is, the area above that is actually the base of this slot, and we've got a cut feature which is filled with soil, stone. There is quite a band of stone within it, and also if you can see the two lighter blobs there between either side of the arrow, those are again some of these patches of clay. It's not the same sort of clay as the actual platform itself is made of. And what we're thinking this might be, and it needs to be proven that this is just a slot and not just a post hole or a pit, but that it goes all the way across the platform. But we're thinking that this might be a slot for a timber, and that we might have this clay material might actually be the remains of wattle and daub. It might be the daub, the clay that's put onto wattle, stop the wind whistling in. Right, sorry, now we don't. Right, okay. Trench D down the bottom, I'll come to in a minute. Trench E, we didn't really find very much in it. There are hints of stuff along the edges, but one of the reasons that Trench E was put in there was that we were hoping again to pick up something on the sides of the platform to try to see if we got a wall, some sort of structure going along there. And we haven't found, certainly in what we've taken off so far, we haven't found anything. So we're still a bit missing any sides to anything. Now Trench D is actually sort of at the same level as part of the lower platform, but it may be lower, but we can't tell. It's quite extraordinary how you can have two bits of excavation side by side, separated by about 20 centimeters of turf, and on one side is completely different to the other. So on the right hand side we can see the pit that we were talking about that had been cut into the lower platform, and then on the left hand side we can see this stone spread. It's a bit mixed. You've got larger stones towards the left hand side and the right hand side. The stone in the middle is very much a concentration of quartz. That may or may not have any meaning, but although we found bits of quartz over the whole site, like small bits, conker size bits of quartz, this was actually a whole concentration of them, and nowhere else have we seen this. So is this hiding something? Is there some hole or pit underneath this? Is this possibly the base of the platform that they put stones down to start with to try to bed the clay to make sure it doesn't slip? That's something that needs to be looked at further. And so, go on.
Come back in then. So, thank you, Jenny. That's quite a rapid tour through what we've got so far. But what does it tell us? What do we know? I'm mindful of the time. We were told an hour, so we'll try to keep to that. But we'll go quickly through what we know, and then maybe have a bit of free discussion as well. So back to Julian Revest's lovely photograph of this site. What do we know about this this building platform? I'd like to use the term building platform because it's important to emphasize a platform of that nature was created to put a building on it. Sometimes you call them house platforms, but building platform will suffice. And so we know there's a building platform at Cwmffwrn. It has the appearance of what we would describe as a classic medieval to early post-medieval building platform. It's cut into the slope at right angles. It has a drainage gully cut along at least one side. It slopes down along its length, and there's no surface evidence of any structure upon it. Because I'll say this, traditionally we would look at most medieval, early post-medieval building platforms as being bare platforms, because they were used at a time when there was plenty of timber to use for building. It's only later than when the good timber ran out that people started using more stone for structures, especially in a county like Radnorshire, and especially in this particular area where there are still plenty of trees in the landscape, to be fair. We also know that this Cwmffwrn platform includes an upper platform and a lower platform, as Jenny said. The upper platform is 15 metres long, 4 metres wide. That's likely where the building stood. I'll talk a little bit about what sort of building it might have been later on. There's no evidence at all there's a stone building here at all, which is a surprise when we know there was a homestead here in the 1840s. It clearly wasn't a stone building. There's no brick or mortar. We saw the cottage earlier, or the brick and the lime mortar everywhere. That's what you expect from an 18th, 19th century farmhouse or cottage. There is none of that here. So we are looking at a site that almost certainly had a timber frame building standing on it, which in itself is really interesting, because that might imply that it's very old. It was very old in the 19th century when it was abandoned. We've got some suspected post holes, a potential sill beam slot, which would be the base of a timber frame wall, and we've got the lumps of clay, which again suggest to us that the walls were of wattle and daub, not of stone or brick. Okay, so these are really significant little bits of information. As archaeologists looking at settlements in the Welsh landscape, we rarely see something like this. This is quite unusual. This little lower platform, 5 metres by 3 roughly, we think it's been added later. We don't think it's the same date as the upper platform. And this is the key thing, the significant spot, the radiocarbon date from that platform dates it to the 16th to 17th century. The range, 87% probability, is it's between 1510 and 1668, which would put it probably in the post-dissolution phase of the history of Abbey Cwmffwrn, you'd argue. But regardless, if that is a 16th to 17th century addition to an existing platform, that kind of implies that the upper platform may well be a medieval platform and may date back to the time of the Grange. Okay, so again, we're very excited. But one interesting thing about the lower platform, from what we've seen of it, there's absolutely no evidence of a structure on it at all, of any sort. So, but you know, more work would need to be done on that one. It's a bit of a mystery, really. I just wanted to point out, because as the introductions point out, we spend a lot of time wandering the hills. Platforms are things that we're very fond of. We see a lot of them in the uplands. I just want to show you a very quick example to show that Cwmffwrn, where it sits in the sort of settlement history of Powys or Mid Wales. This is actually up in the Elam Valley, well, the Cwmffwrn Valley, technically. The houses off to the right are at Dola Mynach, which is, of course, one of the drainages of Strata Florida Abbey. We're high on the hills above, so it's a bit of a relationship similar to Cwmffwrn and Abbey Cwmffwrn, you could argue, in some respects. It's certainly on a monastic range. But you can see the platform in the centre. There's a pole at the end of it. You're looking at the flat platform. I'm standing taking the photograph above the fan on the upper end of it. The apron, that line of bracken in the mid distance is the top of the apron that falls away down slope. If I put it side on view of it, the pole is in the middle of the flattish platform. So you can see that cut into the slope there, exactly as it Cwmffwrn. That's the end where the fan, you'll find the fan, this gently sloping platform where the timber frame building stood is in the middle, and you can see the apron falling off there. That is what we see time after time after time in the uplands of central Wales. Okay, so that's why we think we're likely to be looking at a settlement site in Cwmffwrn that has medieval origins. It's quite, highly probable. We've got a radiocarbon date in the 16th, 17th century, early post-medieval. That's fine. What we're interested in is, can we show there's a medieval house here, or a medieval building, or medieval activity? And I want you to think now, when you think of a building standing on this platform, don't think of a farmhouse in the traditional sense. I know this is just a throwaway thing I've put on. Think of a simple timber frame building, okay, with good oak posts and oak frame, with the gaps filled in with wattle and with clay plastered over it, and a thatched roof. It's something in that sort of league that we were probably thinking of. Sorry, before I will say one thing, it's quite exciting, but possibly something that survived at Cwmffwrn until the 1840s and then was wiped out when the estate upgraded its farmhouses and cottages in the 1850s, 1860s. So it was probably in such poor condition they didn't want to retain it. They either stripped everything they could that was useful away from it, or just let it rot and fall down. Who knows? But because it was timber and wattle and daub and thatch, there's nothing left. It's rotted away. Right, Jenny.
I've got a mouthful of soother. So why didn't the artifact help us? Well, we've been talking now and talked ourselves into the fact that platforms are medieval or early post-medieval, but the artifacts we found aren't. This is some of them. I won't go into the different types of wares, but you can see that there is actually quite a wide range, a wide mix of different types of pottery going on. But they're all late 18th, 19th, and in some cases 20th century. The yellow piece there is actually 20th century. So where was this coming from, and why? How does it relate to anything? Well, most of this pottery hasn't come from any deep feature. It's come from the top layers, really, or just below the top layers. And the feeling we're getting is that this area, at this point in the 19th century, maybe into 20th century, was really being used as a dumping ground. We have got a little bit more evidence of that, is that in the area where the beam slot is, the material over that is very peaty and we think this may even have been a manure heap or something, and that they were actually using this area just for dumping things on in general. So this pottery, we don't believe, has come from the platform. We think it's either come from the cottage, the upper building. Well, either one of those, I'm guessing, really. So the pottery and the other artifacts are almost all 20th, 19th, 20th century. Pottery very much comes from the Staffordshire pottery, so it doesn't come from everywhere. However, and this is the bit Paul was talking about, it's something that we've discovered as the finds have been analysed. There is one pottery sherd, which the closest thing that we can assess that it looks like, it seems to be Paris siltstone tempered ware, which is 12th to 13th century generally. And that may indicate there's some medieval activity somewhere. So it was found in Trench D, which is that area that got the quartz in it, mixed along with lots of sherds of 19th century pottery. So it's not from a context in situ. This isn't where the piece of pottery was left in the medieval period. It's been moved around and mixed around. But it does also suggest in that area that there may have been disturbance, that maybe we have got some lower layers which had the pottery in, which then got mixed in either by something like that pit being dug or on whatever's happening with the stone area, and that they've got mixed up together. But yes, because otherwise, well, I've already covered this bottom piece, really, that really the pottery is in the top things, and it seems to have been dumped on the platform site and not put there. Apart from, and this sherd mixes in with that. Now, so this is the pottery from 012, which is the topsoil over Trench D. So that stony area with the quartz patch in it, this is the material from there. The things on the bottom right are actually stone. We retained whatever people put in the tray, we retained and washed and made sure we had a look at all of them before anything was discarded. So you can see the other bits of pottery along the top, oh, very much, they're glazed wares. There's these 19th, maybe early 20th century wares, bit battered, but they're still there. But it's the sherd in the bottom left is the thing that is of particular interest. And this is a closer up shot of the other side of that sherd. Now you can see it's got no glaze on it. It's quite coarse. It's got quite a rough surface. It's not like you'd expect if you've got a nice clay pot. But also it's got, did you circle it? No. If you can see the cursor there, where the red dot is, there is a reddish dot. And that seems to be quite typical of this, whereas it has these very small bits of stone, reddish stone in them. And that's what's making us think that this might be this particular ware. And this ware is found in this area, and also has been found at Aberystwyth Castle, it's believed. But particularly this area going up towards Montgomery, basically. So we might have a piece of a first hint that artifactually we might have something medieval.
We get to the point where we need to look at, we've established what we know, but what would we like to know? What's left? What is there that we need to think about to justify a return to this site? Because we certainly believe that more can be done here. We would like to know what the date of that upper platform is. If we're a bit more excavation there, we may find datable evidence, whether it's pottery or charcoal, that can help us date the origins of the upper platform. Can we find more artifacts, that date the medieval period? A big question that bothers us is that reed patch at the top end, the western end of that platform, may be hiding more evidence of a building. It may even be hiding the house itself. It's about 3 or 4 meters long. That's enough to hide the end of a house.
The other about that bit, of course, is that it's waterlogged, which might mean that more things might survive in there. Things that normally decay, organic things, might.
Yeah, we already know that there is wood and leather surviving in that. We took some leather out of it, but it was probably Victorian, but things survived there. And likewise, the drainage ditch along the south side of the platform, it's waterlogged. It may well have been the place that rubbish was thrown over time, and it may have great archaeological potential. So that, and the waterlogged conditions mean that organic materials may well have survived. And then can we find any more evidence of the structure of the building? It is a mystery. We've got a map that shows there's a farmhouse there in the mid-19th century. In the early 21st century, we can't even find the walls of a house. Barely any evidence of a structure. That's a bit of an oddity, and we would like to find more evidence of the structure of the building. So I'm not sure what that is. Yeah, so I just want to finish really by this thing about this question about the homestead. Okay, and it bothers me, it keeps me awake. That house that's shown as a homestead, what could it have been? Now, see, if you think, I've always said it's probably something in the longhouse tradition, which would fit in with these platform houses. When we think of a Welsh longhouse, we think of something like this lovely rustic scene of a thatched farmhouse with the byre or the cowshed on its lower side down the slope. And that's the important thing for drainage, as on these platforms, which are sort of nascent longhouses in a way. The living quarters at the top end drops down to the animal quarters at the lower end. Okay, but I think at Cwmffwrn we must not think of a farmhouse or a building like this. This is not what we're dealing with here. The archaeological evidence shows us that isn't what we've got. I'll very quickly go through some examples from Iorwerth Pete's masterpiece, The Welsh House, which he deals with the issue of the longhouse. And I'll just show a few images, okay, that may be of use. This is a lovely building, Abernodwydd, for Montgomeryshire House, okay? Parts half stone, the black end. The other end is timber framed. I presume was the original house, and they tacked or rebuilt part of it in stone. But look at the gable end of the timber frame bit. Note, if I click on here, there's your sill beam standing on stone pads. Okay, so this house at Cwmffwrn, I wonder, was it a structure, not a 2-story building like this one, but a single story, perhaps a simpler building, okay, but timber framed and set on stone pads. So archaeologically, all that will have gone, okay? We'll be left with very little to show the structure because there's very little stone involved in it, okay? And then go back to the question of in some ways the upper and the lower platforms. This is a Carmarthenshire example of a longhouse, okay? To the right, you've got the parlour, the bedroom, the living room, the dairy in the middle. You're going left to the cowshed. But then outside the house, you've got a pigsty and a yard. They've added on to the end of the building. And I do wonder, at some point at Cwmffwrn, did they add that lower platform to add a working area, storage area, an animal area? We don't know. But that tradition of adding to the building is very much something that you'll see in the longhouse tradition. Sorry, I should have marked them. A different example, Cwmffwrn in the Clywyn Valley in Radnorshire. Cwmffwrn is now in St Fagans Museum, this lovely house, actually. It's beautiful, it's worth visiting. What I want to draw attention to here is look at how small the living space is compared to the animal space. And again, that top 3 or 4 meters on the platform in Cwmffwrn could be hiding that one room where the people actually lived. That, and you know, Angela's prodded around. There's a lot of stone under those reeds. We could even have elements of a stone building under there. We just haven't got into it. It's too wet. Same again, an example from Kerry and Montgomeryshire. Again, there's one room to live in. The rest is given over to the animals. Okay, so that could well have happened at Cwmffwrn. Okay, there's a big area for animals. And I think Jenny was very keen when we added this in. This is a place in Llansilin that we saw, okay? Because one thing I'd say about these timber frame houses, we've lost them. They disappeared in the 19th, early 20th centuries. We don't see them in the landscape particularly anymore. Do you want to say something about this, Jen?
Yeah. It's not well, but the thing is, sometimes we may see them in the landscape, but we can't see them for what they are. And this is one particular building that we did a building recording on. Apart from the chimney, which might give away something, you just look at it and think, oh, it's a brick cottage, you know, whatever, until you go around the back. And then you see the timber framing. It hasn't got wattle and daub, it's been infilled with brick on this occasion, but you can see the timber framing there very nicely. And on the, sorry, go back, just go back, no, it's my fault for hesitating. On the left-hand side, you can see there's a stone gable. So you've got a timber structure here. We think the stone gable was actually contemporary with the timber framing, and that it just had that element to it. And then inside, this is the other end of the gable, inside the adjoining shed. But you can see the remains of the timber framing. You can see the timbers going across, timbers coming down. And although you can't see it because of the bits of machinery in the way there, bits of gate, there is actually a wooden sill beam that goes across there. And you can see in that bit to the left of the ranging rod, there's a gap, and in there's actually it's quite not corroded, that's metal, rotten timber, again part of this timber building. Next one. And we just turned around 90 degrees now to look at the back of the barn that's attached to the house. And there you can actually see parts of the timber framing still remaining. You've got sill beam, that may have been replaced, but you've got the uprights and a cross beam that goes all the way across the stone wall on the side. And these elements have been encased on the front wall. On that front wall, we think there's actually was a timber on there originally, and what they've done is they've just stuck this brick wall on over top of it. Partly they may have demolished it, but you've got this building that on one level just looks like it's just a brick, bit cute, but brick thing. But actually inside it, you've got this timber framed building hiding away.
And just pretty much finally, you know, just an example of a 19th century farmhouse we excavated 2 years ago in my VOD. In a trench, you can see the line in the foreground, the line in the distance. Those are the lateral walls, the stone base of the stone walls of the farmhouse. This farmhouse has been completely demolished, okay? But any normal building that's built of stone, you will, even after demolition and robbing, you will find the foundation trenches and the rubble, bits of brick, bits of mortar, and so forth. So we don't see that, you know, at Cwmffwrn, which makes us think something very different is happening. So when we think of medieval houses, to finish off, don't get out of your minds grand things to do with monks or manors or whatever. This is not the story of Cwmffwrn. Cwmffwrn is a much simpler place on the margins of enclosure, in an upland context. Okay, so we're dealing with something very simple. And this is nothing. This isn't what it would have looked like necessarily, but the materials are what we're looking at. The timber framing, the wattle and daub walling, the thatch roofing. Okay, imagine a building like that stood for 300, 400, 500, 600 years, and it got to the point of rotting and falling down by the mid-19th century. So the estate built a new cottage just over the way and just abandoned the old one and let it rot. Okay, that we feel is probably the story we want to tell of Cwmffwrn. Though future excavation could change that picture, but that seems to be where we're heading. That's what we feel is going on at Cwmffwrn. And to finish off, thank you for your patience.
We'd just like to thank very much, Ian and Angela as Cwmffwrn for allowing their land to be explored, and the trust, I'm sure, is very grateful for the opportunity that being able to explore their lands gives them. And Angela is a very enthusiastic excavator as well. but also the officers and members, the Abbey Come Here Heritage Trust, for their vision and enthusiasm devising this project. This project is theirs. We may have overseen the archaeology element of it, but it's their vision and enthusiasm that has led this through. Their organisational skills I alluded to earlier, and the place ran like clockwork. Their site work they did, from whether they were excavating, helping survey, to the guided walks they did, and drone photography, which all came together to make this what it was. Members of the public who volunteered and spent time with us and helped further our understanding of the Cwmffwrn platform, and hopefully gave them an insight into what we do and why we do. Martin Lowcock for analysing the finds from Cwmffwrn. He may have been swearing about us a bit, but he's done it. And of course the funders, which in this case was the Shared Prosperity Fund. Thank you.